The crowd roared like thunder, shaking the steel bones of the galactic arena as every alien species filled the stands with glowing eyes. Twitching antennae and pulsating bioluminescent skin, each chanting the name of the undefeated champion Kravax, who towered behind the energy gate muscles, bulging armor stained from dozens of past kills, his triple-jawed mouth snarling at the thought of another effortless victory in the ring. The announcer's voice boomed across the stadium, hailing the long-awaited finale of the Blood Games, a deathmatch that would decide supremacy across systems. And then a strange name appeared on the holographic board, one no alien had ever heard of before. A murmur swept across the tiers as the name human was spoken aloud. For the first time in the arena's 1,000-year history, confusion turned into laughter, then louder laughter as a single figure stepped into the light. He was small compared to Kravax, not frail, but lean, wearing simple armor with dents and tears that told a story of survival, not privilege. His face was half hidden under a scratched helmet, but the visible half showed a deep scar cutting from brow to jaw. His eyes locked on Kravax without flinching as he walked across the sand slowly, deliberately, every step echoing louder than the cheers that surrounded him. Aliens nudged each other, pointing at the human, some shouting insults, some throwing food and light objects into the ring. Others simply watched, curious how long the newcomer would last. The announcer tried to build suspense, but his tone shifted from mockery to uncertainty as he described the human's origin. A planet marked as a death world, filled with extreme climates, aggressive wildlife, and constant conflict. Still the crowd laughed. None believed a species from such a backward world could pose any threat to Kravax, whose record of victory included snapping a warbeast spine with his bare hands and melting the armor of a fireborn knight with nothing but his raw strength. Mez Maru beset. The gate dropped and Kravax stormed forward, raising his blade. The human raised his hand calmly and shouted 3 words so loud, so fierce, they silenced the entire arena. "Am ready." Kravax hesitated, not from fear, but surprise. No one had ever dared welcome him like that before, not with confidence, not with eyes that dared him to try. The crowd's laughter died in their throats, replaced by whispers and shifting seats and blinking lights as sensors tracked every move and every heartbeat. Kravs roared a challenge, his voice like 1,000 hammers, and charged across the ring, swinging his jagged blade with killing speed. The human ducked, rolled to the side, and swept sand into the champion's eyes. Not dirty by Earth standards, just smart, adaptive, unpredictable. While Kravax howled, blinking, the human dashed behind him and jabbed the back of his knee, causing the Titan to stumble for a breath. Audience gasped, not because it was a strong hit, but because it was the first time anyone had dared touch Krabs before the first minute had passed. Krabs turned enraged, swinging blindly, slashing the air with fury, while the human danced back, shifting low, weaving side to side. Like a predator from ancient Earth jungles, one of the alien nobles in the VIP chamber leaned forward, his mandibles clicking in thought as he asked aloud, what kind of training produces that kind of movement? Another answered, perhaps madness, perhaps instinct. The announcer tried to recover the energy of the crowd, shouting about how the human had landed only a scratch, but the seed of doubt had already been planted in every mind that watched the human move back in the ring. The human never smiled, never taunted, just studied, waited, breathed. His body was tense, but not afraid. His eyes watched Kravax with precision, measuring not power, but rhythm and timing and habits. Vax charged again, this time more careful, but the human sidestepped again and again, his fingers brushing the ground as if remembering the feel of earth under his feet before he came to this alien world. He ducked under another strike, twisted behind Kravax, and slammed his elbow into the creature's kidney cluster, not enough to stop him, but enough to hurt him. The crowd shifted again, unease blooming like wildfire. As for the first time in living memory, Kravax showed pain. The human stepped back, eyes unblinking, shoulders rising and falling with heavy breaths. He had taken hits before, not in this arena, but on Earth, in darker places against crueler foes, and each breath he took was borrowed from those memories, each move he made was carved from years of surviving what no alien would ever understand. Kravax shook, his head clearing the pain and his eyes flared with fury. He roared again and prepared for a finishing move, one that had ended the lives of countless challengers, but something changed in the crowd. They no longer cheered, they leaned in closer, watching not Kravax, but the human, and, as the human adjusted his stance, 1 foot back, chin down, fists raised not with fear, but with fury, a new kind of silence gripped the arena. Not quietness, but awe. The galactic arena had welcomed a human for the first time, and it was no longer laughing. The silence that followed the end of the first round weighed heavy across the arena, but inside the human's mind, it was not the cheers or jeers he remembered. It was the sound of the war back home, the screaming of broken comrades, the quiet of snow-covered graves, and the endless drills and forgotten deserts where no cameras watched, where he was cast aside by his own kind, a failed recruit, too unstable, too emotional, too raw for structured war, and yet it was in that rejection that he found a new purpose. He trained not for medals, not for rank, but to survive. He had left Earth alone, joining a blacklisted Tor colony transport using forged ID and hidden scars, not to escape, but to find something worthy of pain, and this arena where the galaxy's finest killers were worshipped like gods felt exactly like the place he needed to be. Back in the ring, Kravax paced like a cornered beast, insulted and shaken. He had expected another easy kill. Instead, he bled for the first time in years, and worse, the crowd was watching. His opponent was something dangerously close to respect. The human did not speak again. He let his actions tell the story, and they did with each step, each breath, each movement. He was not graceful like a warrior born in temples, nor enhanced like the cyber fighters of the Martian belt. He moved like a man who had no choice, like a man who had learned every lesson with blood. Kravax charged again, furious, this time using his left side to bait the human, but the human ducked, slid under the swing, and slammed his fist into Kravax's gut, then rolled clear before the counter could connect. The crowd let out a sound that was not quite shock and not quite praise. It was something unfamiliar. A noble in the skybox whispered that the human should have died 10 moves ago, and yet he lived. Another whispered maybe that was exactly what made humans dangerous, not their weapons, but their will. Crabs finally caught him once, an elbow that cracked ribs and sent the human stumbling. The blow echoed through the arena, and for a moment it looked like the end, but the human dropped to one knee, then stood again, wiping blood from his mouth and staring straight into Kravax's as aliens across the galaxy, who watched from streams and other systems, leaned forward on their screens. This was not a match anymore. It was a message. The human moved in a strange way. Now, less like a soldier, more like an animal circling a larger predator, not to dominate, but to exhaust. Every move calculated, every breath drawn with care, his body bruised and failing, but his mind still cold. Crabs growled a low, thunderous sound and swung again. But this time, the human stepped inside the arc of the blade and struck low at the joint of Kravax's knee. Armor cracked under the pressure of a technique no alien had ever seen. Champion staggered, and the arena erupted into chaotic noise. Some cheering, some screaming, all confused. The announcer's voice stuttered over the loudspeakers as he tried to process what was unfolding. The human gave no signal, no celebration. He simply moved again, striking when needed, vanishing when targeted, blood dripping from his side, but still pushing forward. The crowd saw in that moment a truth few had ever considered. Humans do not fight for glory. Humans do not fight for entertainment. Humans fight because they must, because the alternative is extinction, and that has always been unacceptable to them. One of the tech officers monitoring biosigns leaned over and Showed his superior the human's heart rate. It was slowing down, not rising. The more damage he took, the more controlled he became. Meanwhile, Kravax was starting to falter, his movements less precise, his breathing ragged, his confidence shaken by the unyielding force he faced, not a superior warrior, but an indestructible soul. Human whispered something under his breath, maybe a name, maybe a prayer, maybe a memory no one knew, and then he launched himself at Kravax with reckless speed, ducked a final swing, and delivered a bone-crushing strike to the side of the head. Kravax crashed into the arena, wall, sand and stone cracking under his way. Tan still the human stood. Bruised, brewed and broken. Did not know what to see. Did not know what to see. Some cheered, some cried out in rage, some simply watched in silence as something ancient awakened in them, not fear, not admiration, but recognition. They had seen power before, they had seen dominance before, but never had they seen someone rise. Again and again, without implants, without venom, without enhancement, just a mono-human. And, as Kravax pushed himself up for one last desperate tack, dragging his weapon through the dust, the human did not wait. He moved first, this time faster, harder. Striking with everything he had, the final blow came not from hate, not from anger, but from a quiet fire that had burned long before this match. Began Kravax fell again, and this time did not resound the arena for the first time in its long and bloody history. Stood in silence. The body of Kravax lay twisted on the blood-stained sand, his limbs twitching slightly, his chest rising and falling in slow, painful waves as the crowd stared in disbelief, unsure whether to cheer, scream, or remain frozen in their seats, because what they had just witnessed defied everything they believed about strength, about species, about the natural order of the galaxy. The human stood not in triumph, but in exhaustion, his shoulders slumped, his hands shaking, but his eyes still sharp, still locked on the fallen giant, as if expecting him to rise once more and continue the fight. An announcer's voice crackled into life, hesitating as if even the arena system itself could not process what had occurred. Then, with a forced burst of energy, he declared the unthinkable: the victor is the human warrior from Earth. There was a moment of stunned silence then. Chaos. Some aliens roared in outrage, claiming trickery or interference. Others chanted the word human over and over, their voices rising with the energy of something new, something forbidden. The nobles and high command exchanged glances, some fearful, some intrigued, others furious beyond reason. The arena guard stepped closer to the ring, unsure whether to escort the human away or eliminate him for disrupting the sacred balance of the game stick. Human ignored them all, his gaze lowered as blood continued to trickle from a gash on his temple, his legs unsteady but holding firm, each breath drawn like it cost him a piece of his soul. Yet he stood. He had done this not for glory, not for his planet, not even for revenge, but because he had nothing left to lose, and in that moment of pain and survival, it gained something more powerful than victory. He had gained fear, respect. A group of alien medics hurried toward Kravax, performing rapid scans and neural checks, but their gestures were tense and mechanical. None of them could explain how such a being, such a warrior, had been brought down by someone so physically inferior by all galactic standards. Meanwhile, the human was approached by a security commander, whose uniform shimmered with gold thread and digital sigils. He raised a translator drone and asked the question that hung in the air like static. "How did you win?" The human replied slowly, his voice hoarse and low. "I lost more times than I can count. I learned what it takes to keep moving when everything is gone. You fight different when you're already broken." The commander said nothing, just nodded once and signaled for two guards to escort the human out of the ring. Not in chains, but in guarded silence, the crowd parted as he passed, some aliens bowing their heads, others spitting in fear, a few whispering to their companions about Earth, about the fire in that man's eyes. The medical chamber The human sat shirtless, covered in bruises and bandages, while a nurse with insect limbs tended to his wounds. She asked softly, "How many battles have you fought before?" This he looked at her without answering, and she understood some wars leave no records, some victories are never seen far. Above in the observation tower, the Council of 13 convened urgently, the screens around them looping footage of the fight. From every angle, biometric data, psychological analysis, predictions, charts, and graphs. All showing one undeniable truth: the human had not been lucky, the human had outclassed. Kravax through instinct, will, and terrifying adaptability, one of the elder. Counselors whispered the words that no one wanted to say. If this is what one human can do, what happens if more come? The answer came not from data, but from history, because they all knew of Earth, knew the reason it was marked as a death world, knew. Its people were forged not by genetic perfection, but by centuries of war, betrayal, survival, and evolution. One old younger voice at the table suggested recruiting the human, using him as a weapon for empire control, but an older voice growled in, "Return, and if they refuse, what then?" No one spoke. After that, in the lower levels, the human was transferred to a secure chamber, not a prison, but not freedom. Either observation glass surrounded him, cameras embedded in the walls tracking every breath, every blink, while scientists of every species watched, debated, studied. They wanted to know what made him special. Was it his biology, his brain, his training? But they missed the truth that it was not something inside his blood, it was something deeper. Was the fire of a world that never gave up. Humans sat there, still wounded, still healing, staring back at the cameras with a calm defiance, and whispered again to himself a name, a memory, maybe a promise. The games were not over, they had just begun. Inside the shadow chamber, the human sat in silence, his wounds fresh and throbbing, but his mind sharper than ever. Every minute spent in this glass cell only fed the growing fire. Inside him, the alien scientists surrounding the room debated furiously. In dozens of languages, some demanded invasive scans, others urged caution. A few even argued to release him, fearing the kind of message his imprisonment might send across the galaxy. The Council's voice echoed above them all, a command to observe, study, and most of all, to learn what could make a single human outlast the champion of 1,000 wars. Cameras blinked and recorded every detail, the way the human flexed his fingers, when no one watched, the way he closed his eyes for seconds, at a time searching for some hidden thread of strength in memories of forests, deserts, ruins, all the forgotten places that shaped him before he ever stepped into the arena. He remembered his training, not in formal academies, but on city rooftops, on burning streets and alleys, where mercy was a foreign word, where survival was a game with no rules, no medals, only scars. One day, an alien in a plain gray uniform entered the chamber. He was smaller than most others, his features unreadable, his eyes not threatening, but curious. He placed a tray of food on the table and sat down across from the human. No weapons, no armor, only a recording device. Between them, the human stared at him, waiting. The alien spoke softly. "You fought differently. You refused to die, even when logic said you should have." Why? The human answered, not with pride, but with the dull honesty of someone who had already lost too much. "Because I have seen death. I have carried it in my hands. You cannot scare me with it anymore." The alien nodded, scribbling notes, his antennae twitching as he listened. The human kept talking. Now, not for the interrogator, but for himself, for the ghosts that walked with him in the quiet moments back on Earth. "I was nothing. I was nobody, just another forgotten name, another broken tool. But in this place, you made me more. You gave me a reason to stand, a reason to show you what survival means." Elsewhere in the arena, compound rumors spread like wildfire. Slaves in the kitchens began whispering about the human fighter, calling him Ghostwalker or the Undying. Some guards started locking doors twice at night, while a few young soldiers watched. Replays of the match over and over, searching for the moment when the tide turned and the impossible became realva. Noble, who had watched from the skybox at the start of the fight, was now obsessed. He sent spies to learn everything about Earth. Digging through ancient transmissions, intercepted radio. Chatter stories of famine, flood, fire, war stories of a people who would not yield. Who always rebuilt, who laughed at odds, who survived not because of strength, but because they refused to lie. Down and accept fate. Back in his chamber, the human healed day by day, refusing painkillers. Refusing rest, he paced the floor, practiced old drills. Moved until his muscles screamed at him to stop, but he kept going. If they wanted to study him, he would. Give them a show they would never forget, but behind the glass, not everyone was his enemy. One of the scientists left notes for him, slips of paper tucked inside. Food containers, tiny messages written in code, offering encouragement or secret information. About the council's plans, she wrote, "You have friends here. Not all of us want to see you broken. Some of us want to see you free." One night alarms blared through the compound, a security breach sent guards scrambling down hallways, but the human stayed still, listening, focusing on every sound and vibration. He recognized the chaos, not as danger, but as opportunity. We, perpunes. He waited as the lights flickered and the door clicked open. From the inside, the friendly scientist rushed in, breathless and terrified. She whispered, "Follow me," and together they moved through hidden corridors, ducking past scanners. Crawling through vents, emerging finally in an old supply bay near the outer walls. She handed him a battered comm unit and a data stick. "This has everything you need," she whispered, "names, locations, plans. Use it to finish what you started." The human looked at her with new respect, not as a rescuer, but as another survivor. Someone willing to risk everything for a chance at change. Outside the arena, the city was restless. Rumors of rebellion spread faster than any official decree. Slaves and citizens alike began to see the human not as a freak or monster, but as a symbol of something. They had forgotten hope, the belief that even the smallest spark can light a fire that shakes empire's ass. The humans slipped away into the darkness, disappearing from cameras and sensors. A new fear gripped the council. Not just of one man, but of an idea that had already started to spread. The games had changed the arena. Had changed, and so had the galaxy. A cold wind swept through the underbelly of the city as the human made his way into the forgotten tunnels. Beneath the arena, his breath slow and controlled his mind, replaying every step, every twist of memory, every lesson learned in years spent surviving the worst of Earth's cruelty. Above him, the lights of the arena flickered and the crowd still gathered for new blood games, but the echoes were different now. The audience's laughter had faded, replaced by whispers of the impossible victory by a creature from a primitive planet. The human moved like a shadow, slipping past patrols, bypassing locked doors and scanning old maps given to him by the scientist who had risked everything for him. He found allies in the least expected places, a group of alien slaves huddled in a boiler room, eyes wide with both fear and awe, recognizing the human not as a symbol of terror, but of hope. One of them, a young alien with cracked skin and nervous hands, passed him a battered energy pistol and a ration bar. "You are the reason we dare to dream again," the alien said, his voice trembling but filled with conviction. "We will help you however we can." The human nodded, silent, accepting their help with the same quiet dignity he showed in the ring swear. The council raged behind sealed doors, demanding answers from generals, scientists, and spies. How could a single human survive what so many others could not? Is he alone, or are there more like him? A general slammed a fist onto the table, demanding immediate containment of all Earth-born threats. A scientist argued back that such actions would only fuel rebellion across a dozen systems. A noble warned that the arena's reputation could not survive another upset, while the rulers argued a quiet resistance blossomed in the city's shadows. Rebels, inspired by the humans' endurance, passed coded messages across the marketplace, painted symbols of defiance on hidden walls, and whispered stories to their children of a human who stood against the impossible inside. The tunnels the humans studied the stolen data stick, mapping out the Council's weaknesses, the arena's secret passages, and the hidden network of slaves and rebels that stretched across the city. He felt the old anger and sorrow mixing with something new, not just a will to survive, but a duty to ignite hope in others. He listened to recordings from Earth's loved ones, lost voices from the past, people who once believed in him. Even when he did not believe in himself, the city above grew restless. Small riots broke out near the arena gates, crowds chanting for freedom and justice. Guards responded with force, but each time they hesitated when confronted with the symbol of a human painted on shields or banners. They remembered the day one man changed the fate of the games, and it shook them to their Corin, a hidden warehouse. The human met with leaders of the rebellion, aliens of many species, all broken in their own ways, but united by a single spark. The human told them what he had learned from the data stick: exposed secret weapons caches, vulnerable guard posts, the Council's plan to silence dissent forever. "We have one chance," he said, his voice steady, his eyes burning. "If we move now, we can free the city and show the galaxy what it means to never give up." Rebels looked to him for guidance, not because of his strength, but because of the way he carried his scars as badges of honor, the way he refused to let pain define him. They followed, not out of fear, but out of a newfound faith in the impossible. Night, the human led the charge through the city's service tunnels, emerging beneath the arena. Just as another blood game was about to begin, the crowd had returned, eager for more violence, hungry for distraction. But the human's image was burned into their memories, and the atmosphere was tense with expectation. The rebellion struck hard and fast, disabling security grids, storming guard posts, freeing prisoners from the cells beneath the stands. Chaos erupted above as the Council tried to flee, panicked voices filling the airwaves with desperate orders. The human fought at the front, his movements a blur of practiced violence, not for glory, but to protect those who followed him, to make every sacrifice count. He saw the faces of the scientists, the slaves, the rebels in every frightened eye, and he moved with the fury of a lifetime spent battling the odds amid the chaos. The Council's escape shuttle lifted off, but not before the human disabled its engines with a precise shot from his stolen pistol. The ship crashed on the outskirts of the city, and the remaining leaders were dragged before the crowd. Their power shattered their arrogance. Broken, the arena that had once echoed with laughter and scorn now rang with the cries of victory and freedom for the first time. The games were over, not because of blood or spectacle, but because one human dared to stand alone and show the galaxy what it truly meant to fight. And as the city's citizens poured into the arena to reclaim it from their old masters, they looked to the human not as a conqueror, but as a brother in struggle, a living answer to the question that haunted every corner of the galaxy: what makes a human different? Hope and fire, and the refusal to surrender. The days that followed the rebellion, the city transformed almost overnight. Barricades were torn down as free aliens filled the streets for the first time in generations. Banners of all colors fluttered from broken windows, painted with the same symbol: a human silhouette against a rising sun. The arena's sands were swept clean, not for another fight, but for a gathering of survivors. Old enemies now sat side by side, sharing food and stories of the night. Everything changed. The human did not bask in the celebration. He wandered the streets quietly, watching how fear was replaced by laughter, how guards once feared became trusted friends, how children dared to play again under alien skies. He moved through the markets and hidden alleys, always alert, but with a softness in his eyes that no one had seen in the arena. Word spread quickly through the stars, rumors of a city saved by a human defying the greatest champion. Whispers grew into hope on distant worlds where the Council's reach still choked the spirit of millions. Desperate voices called for help, some sending secret messages to Earth, not begging for warriors, but for the courage to rise up. The council itself fractured by infighting as their leaders sat imprisoned. Their power was broken, their command structure shattered into pieces. Arguments broke out between factions, some blaming the humans, some blaming each other, none willing to accept that a single act of defiance had destroyed the illusion of their invincibility inside the council's old fortress. The human met with the rebels. The scientist who risked everything now wore a leader's badge. She looked at him and asked, "What will you do next?" He answered, not with pride, but with quiet conviction. "I will return home. I have done what I came to do, but you must keep fighting. You must become the hope for your people." Now her voice trembled with gratitude and fear, but she nodded, promising to build something better on the ashes of the old world. She pressed a worn common unit into his hand, the same device she once gave him for escape. Now it was a lifeline to 1,000 new allies. He accepted it not for himself, but for the countless voices now relying on him, even from afar. Preparations began for his departure, but the galaxy would not let him leave so easily. In the shadows of power, a new alliance was forming, secret messages bouncing between distant systems, rebels and outcasts, and even some council defectors, all seeking a new symbol of resistance. They pleaded for the human to become their general, to lead a war against tyranny. He listened to every message, every desperate plea, but he knew his own war was different. He was not a conqueror. He was a survivor, a spark, not a wildfire before he left the city. The human climbed to the top of the arena for the first time since his victory. He looked out over the stands, now filled with life, not blood. He spoke quietly to the crowd, to the rebels, to the lost and the broken, and to the enemies who had become family. "I did not win because I am stronger. I won because I would not surrender, because every time I was knocked down, I stood back up. That is what it means to be human, but it can be true for all of you." To his words spread like wildfire across the networks, reaching corners of the galaxy, untouched by hope for 2 long worlds that had never dreamed of freedom suddenly believed they could change everything if only they refused to give up. The human's message was translated into 1,000 languages, posted on every wall, etched into every memory, as the story of the one who fought not for power, but for the right to be more than a victim. As the sun set on his final day in the city, the scientist and the rebels gathered to say farewell. Some begged him to stay. Others simply thanked him for showing them the way. He smiled for the first time since entering the arena, a small, honest smile that held more power than any weapon. He shook hands, embraced old enemies, turned friends, and walked out of the city into the wilderness beyond. He left behind a legend that could not be killed. A legend that could not be killed. Lesson that could not be unlearned. The council's remaining forces scattered, afraid to face a galaxy that had tasted freedom because of one stubborn human. And as the stars shone above the city, the fires of rebellion spread world by world, each one remembering the night when hope stepped into the ring and never left. The wind whispered through the city's rebuilt towers as the first dawn broke over a skyline once shadowed by fear and tyranny, now glowing with the light of new beginnings. The human walked slowly down an old market street, his boots stirring dust and memories every face he passed belonged to someone changed forever by the battles of the arena and the rebellion that followed. But more than scars or stories, it was the hope in their eyes that told him he had done something that would outlast any victory or defeat. Merchants now set out baskets of fresh fruit and rare spice. Children ran laughing through alleys that once echoed with warning alarms and curfews. Guards who had once crushed dissent now wore the same symbol on their sleeves and offered help to strangers across the galaxy. The legend of the human who had changed everything traveled faster than any ship. Planets under the council's heel began to shake off their shackles, some with violence, some with words, some simply by refusing to obey those who called themselves Rulers' worlds divided by species or history or ancient hate now found unity in their shared refusal to give in the message. Echoed in city squares, whispered in night markets, sung by freedom choirs in every dialect. This is not the age of empires. This is the age of hope back. In the city, leaders from many worlds arrived, each one eager to meet the human, some seeking advice, others looking for guidance, a few simply wanting to see if the stories were true. They found him at the edge of the arena, now overgrown with wildflowers and filled with children. Playing games not of war but of imagination, he greeted every visitor with the same calm humility and always reminded them that victory did not belong to one person alone, but to everyone who refused to surrender. Scientist, who had once risked everything to free him, now stood beside him as an equal. She had grown into her new role as a leader, her voice steady, her gaze clear. She asked him if he would stay to help them build a new council, not of tyrants but of equals. His answer was gentle and resolute. My war is over here, but yours is only just beginning. And you are ready for it. The old nobles and warriors who survived the fall of the arena watched all of this with mixed feelings. Some still clung to the past, afraid of what would come without their iron control. Others began to see the future taking shape in the laughter of the young, in the rebuilding of the city, in the simple truth that the galaxy would never again belong to fear alone. Late one night, as the human prepared to leave the city for the last time, a small crowd gathered to hear him speak, not as a champion, not as a conqueror, but as a fellow survivor. His words were slow, steady, each one carrying the weight of everything he had lived through. Pain can break you or make you strong. Every time you fall, you have a choice: stay down or get up again. That is what it means to be human, but it is also what it means to be alive anywhere. He looked out at the crowd, saw faces from every world, every background, scars old and new shining in the moonlight, and knew that his journey was not just for him or for Earth, but for all who needed to remember that fire could rise from ashes even across the stars. As dawn came, the human left behind not just a legend, but a movement. Cities rose, rebellions flared, hope took root in the darkest corners of the galaxy, all because one human walked into the arena alone and refused to let fate decide the end for him or for anyone who followed his story, spread in tales and songs, in secret codes and open banners in the hearts of those who chose freedom over fear. And every time a child lifted a stick and played at being the champion of the arena, every time a rebel picked up the fight again, every time an old enemy offered peace instead of hate, the legacy of that one human lived on without need for statues or monuments, because the fire he carried was a gift not for one people or one world, but for all who dared to believe that hope could change everything. The city hummed with life as the first rays of sunlight painted gold across its rooftops, and the human wandered through the bustling market streets. He watched the children play where warriors once fell. He saw merchants laugh where fear once choked every breath. He walked slowly, carrying no weapon, now only the weight of memory and the quiet pride that he had helped spark this peace all around him. Beings of 100 worlds traded stories and dreams in the shadows of old statues that no longer frightened anyone. Every voice told a piece of the legend. The human who stood alone in the arena, the stranger who made tyrants kneel and inspired rebels to stand together. The city was free, but the change did not end there across distant systems. The tale of the arena and the hope that rose from its ashes passed from world to world like wildfire. Rulers who once commanded with iron and fire now faced people who would not bow. Hope had become the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy. Not a single human, but the idea that no one was truly alone, that every fall could become a reason to rise again. Some old enemies still plotted in the dark, but most now chose to lay down arms and build instead. Human did not claim any throne, nor did he write any law. Instead, he spent his last days in the city, helping wherever help was needed, teaching what it meant to endure, sharing old Earth jokes with children, fixing broken things in the quiet corners of the city. He became a friend to those who had only known enemies, a mentor to those who had lost. Faith, when at last it was time to leave a river of citizens, walked beside him to the gates of the city. Silent at first, then singing as the sun climbed higher into the sky. They carried no banners, only memories and the unbreakable bond of survival. He stopped at the gates, turned one last time, and looked at the faces of those who had once doubted, hated, even feared him, and now stood. Unafraid because they had learned to hope, he raised a hand in farewell, his eyes shining with all the stories left behind, and then he walked alone into the wilds beyond the city, his shadow. Long, his heart full, and the legend growing with every step, and as the city faded behind him, the wind carried his name across the stars, not as a conqueror, but as a symbol that even in the darkest arena, one spark can set the world alight. The end.